51 years. And he drank for the first 19 years. And he drank, and then I overate, so it was like two addicts living in the same house. And and it's I just thought, because of being raised in addiction, I thought it was my job to take care of my husband. And how I took care of him is I did everything for him. When our first child was born, that was before cell phones or anything, but anyway, he came up there and he said, "Where do you keep my socks and underwear?" Well, they're just right there in a drawer, but what I did, I laid out everything, all of his clothes, like a child every morning, and that's how I got my good feelings about myself. But as far as loving an addict, it's absolutely okay. I mean, we want to love the addicts, just don't take over their responsibilities. And when we do that, when we take over their responsibility, it's almost like saying, "You don't have enough sense to do this. I need to take care of you." And a lot of addicts will leave. But what happens is the non-addict, the non-alcoholic, the non-eating disorder, and I'm including eating disorders in this, because we see eating disorders as an addiction, and I have seen some of the sickest parents in the world trying to help their child get well, and and I'm not downing the parents at all. They just didn't know. They didn't know. I didn't know. I had a daughter that I almost loved her to death, taking care of her, and it's any time that we pull that up, it's any time we do something, like I said, that they can do for themselves, and love is not the problem. It's okay to love. It's like, don't take over their responsibilities. And when you do, like I said, it's like saying, "You don't have enough sense to do this, so I'll take care of it." I remember one time when my husband would get to drinking, he was what we called a running drunk. He'd be gone 2-3 days. I had two babies under 2 years of age, and then I had bonus children that were teenagers, but he'd been gone all weekend. And come Monday morning, I thought, "Oh my God, where is he?" So this is where the shame of the non-addict comes in. So I called, this was before he went into business for himself, so I called where he worked during supply. And the counterman answered the phone, and I said, "I just need to tell you," Ariel was the manager, and I said, "I just needed to tell you that Ariel won't be in today, that he's sick with the flu." And the man said, "Well, how sick is he?" I said, "Oh, he's really sick. I'm going to try to get him to the doctor." I just went on, and he went on and kept asking me questions. And he said, "That is so interesting, because I'm sitting here looking through the plate glass window, and Ariel is sitting at his desk." Ariel is sitting at his desk. Now, he hadn't been home for 3 days, but he made it to work that morning. And I called his, because I wanted to protect that paycheck. And, so being the non-alcoholic, I was the one that felt like the fool. I mean, a fool. I had lied because I didn't want him to know that he had been out drinking all weekend, So those are the things that the non-addict will do, and call in sick for them, whatever. And I know, with my mother, I would clean her up, and no child ought to have to do that. But I would clean her up, and she'd get her drinking buddies over, and they'd all get drunk, and anyway. So I learned from an early age that was my role, was to take care of an addict. And, what that looks like is, well, one thing, you bail them out of jail. They get in jail, it's your job to bail them out. Bless their hearts, they don't need to be in jail, and so and a lot of it, the non-alcoholic does it to protect their own image, and what addiction does, it survives in secrecy. Addiction survives in secrecy. It's a secret, and even we tell the kids, don't you go to school and tell them that daddy came home drunk, or that daddy's been, that mother beat him up, or whatever. Do not go to school and tell those things. And then we deny that how bad it is. We deny because the non-alcoholic thinks they can fix it. They begin to feel all powerful, or we think we have the power, and there's a part of the non-addict that thinks that it's their fault that the addict is using anyway. If I had been thinner, I'd lose weight thinking that would keep him from drinking. I thought, and if I kept house better, well, I've always been a good housekeeper, and I kept a spotless house. So one of the things that we encourage family members to do, and we do it when we have the family members here, is get educated about the disease. Get educated. It is a disease. No one causes it. You can't cure it, and you can't control it. But what you can do, the non-addict can contribute to it, I believe, by doing for the addict what they should do for themselves. And, one thing is the family a lot of times is in so much denial, about how bad the situation really is. And, just a lot of cover up, and, and I'm not saying it's all women. Fathers, husbands can do this, but women do it more. Women do become more of a caretaker than the fathers and the husbands do. In fact, statistics show women hardly, it's almost zero that women do not leave an alcoholic husband. Men will hardly stay with an alcoholic wife. Are y'all with me? Society looks at women who stay with alcoholics or drug addicts, that they're weak, that the woman's weak. Why don't they get out of there? Why don't you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get yourself out of there and all that, and or they will say that they need to stay and take care of. The males, husbands, statistics show that they leave. There's some who will stay, but they don't keep staying unless they have had an alcoholic mother. A lot of your men that are married to alcoholic women have alcoholic mothers, and they will stay with an alcoholic wife. The majority of your men will not stay for the duration of the disease of alcoholism with a wife. And, if they're in church, the church people don't surround the addict. They surround the non-addict if they are a male. The women feel so sorry for them, bless their hearts, having to have that old wife that drinks and doesn't take care of it, and so the women will surround the man. Anyway, I don't need to get into all that, but it is a lot of times, the non-alcoholic will take on the guilt. Like I said, they'll take on the guilt of the disease. If I had done certain things, if I'd been a better wife, if I'd been a better mother, Why didn't I quit work and stay home with that child? Why didn't I pay closer attention to what was happening to him or her? And so the guilt is so strong in the non-addict. And it tells us that, that you're guilty. You did something to cause this, and you're guilty if you don't do something to correct it. And I will say, I found Al-Anon in October of 1968 and stayed in Al-Anon 14 years before my husband went to his first AA meeting. And after I started getting healthier and could get out of myself long enough to kind of see other people around the circle, through the years, what I saw was there would be people, and they were usually came from healthy homes, come to find out. But there would be people who would come into Al-Anon, and they would get well. They would get well, and they would have a choice whether to stay with the alcoholic or not stay with the alcoholic. They were already taking care of themselves. And so when they got to Al-Anon, they did get education about the disease of alcoholism, and they got the disease in the right perspective, that they didn't cause it, cure it, couldn't control it. And I would watch it. They would literally get well. And some of them would continue in Al-Anon, but most of them didn't. They would go on about their lives, and eventually, if the alcoholic didn't get into treatment and get well, they'd divorce them. But then there's those that, and statistics would show this, that would come from alcoholic homes. Adult children of alcoholics would make their way to Al-Anon because they were married or living with an addict or had an addict child. And if they were an adult child of an alcoholic, the guilt of that, the guilt is what kept them, because they just kept feeling like that they did something to cause it, and they must be able to correct it. They must be able to do something to take care of the addict. It's not all about me and my husband, but I did such crazy things. Like, he would come in, and this happened several times, and he would always get sick. And I remember he would, fall down and maybe throw up in the floor and all. I would manage, and a lot of times I'd be big pregnant, but I would manage to get him up, get those dirty clothes off of him, get him all cleaned up, and get him in the bed. And he would have come in a blackout. I didn't know anything about blackouts. And I would try to tell him the next morning or sometime, about what the situation was when he got home. And he would think I made it up. He would call me a liar and all, because he wouldn't remember it. And he said, because he woke up, he was in a clean bed, he was clean, he wasn't in the floor in the middle of his vomit. So those are the things that non-addicts do that we overdo. And a lot of it is, yes, it is because we love an addict. And another thing is the shame of it, the shame of living with an addict, and the non-addict takes on the shame. And, we feel like, well, we've got to clean this mess up and, instruct the kids, and I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty. What confused our children was this. They didn't remember, and they don't remember, those early days of their father drinking and being such a severe alcoholic, to the point one time he lost his driver's license, and for 1 year I had to drive him to work. By that time we had 3 babies under 3 years of age. I had to get them up every morning, drive him to work. And so then the children are instructed to go to school and not tell anyone. They are instructed to keep the secret, So what I was going to say And I was real big in church. I went to that Southern Baptist church every time the church doors open, and it was good for us. It was good for me. It was good for my children, and we went every time. It was a refuge. And that was before, I really knew the disease of alcoholism. And so RL, my husband, started going to church with us. And he stayed sober for 10 years, 10 years in the church. Now, he was not fit to live with. He was a rager. He was horrible. And, there'd be times that I would want to say, here, have a drink, take the edge off. You got to do something. But, of course, I was so glad he wasn't drinking. But what I didn't know was he was suffering from untreated alcoholism. Stopping drinking is not the solution. Yes, if you want to be sober, that is a part of it. You must stop drinking, but that's not the solution. That is the physical part of the disease. Everyone stops drinking. They'll stop drinking in maybe 24 hours, 48 hours, a week. So they know how to stop. They don't know how to stay stopped. So the physical part. And so he went 10 years. And by the way, he always gave me permission. He said, you can share anything about me you want to, just don't forget to sober me up, And he was sober when he passed away and had 32 years of sobriety in AA, and we had some wonderful years together. And so he had that 10 years of sobriety, or dry time. He was nobody's sober alcoholic. He was not drinking and going to church and teaching 12-year-old boys Sunday school. And then he started back drinking. And he finally, one Sunday morning, one of the boys asked him, he said, your aftershave smells like my dad's whiskey. Well, what it was his whiskey, because he had started back drinking. And that's when he quit going to church and got full-blown into becoming sick enough to decide he needed some help, So, finally, through a lot of help for myself, I learned to get off of his back, quit saying anything about his drinking or where he was, what he was doing. Get off of his back, give him the best letting alone in the world. Get off of his back, get out of his way, give the alcoholic a clean birth. Just let him have space. Get off his back, get out of his way, and go on with my own life. So when he started back drinking, it shocked our children because they had never seen the drug alcohol in our house. They didn't know, and I kept it a really good secret, and so did he. We didn't, that he used to be an alcoholic. And so it shocked them when they started seeing their dad. And by that time, he would drink at home. And, he'd bring his drinking buddies in, and they'd play pool and, sing that old song, because we had this big playroom. They'd all sing the song. Alcoholic decorated their house, and he'd joke about how he built the playroom for an alcoholic built it and had its own bar and all. Anyway, so it really did a number on our children because the father that they knew had been a sober father, and now he wasn't. And so some of them even started doing what he was doing. Some of them, would get into his booze. But anyway, the deal was I swore the kids to secrecy. We all kept it a secret. Do not go to school now. Do not go out there in the world and tell people what your dad is doing. So when he made his way, by that time I was completely hands off. In fact, I was already in the alcoholism field. So when he made his way to Alcoholics Anonymous and he sobered up and became a sober member of alcoholism, a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, he started being gone a lot because he was going to meetings, he was working with newcomers after he, was there for a while. And then, I was busy, either going to school or working in the center, and going to Al-Anon and going to Overeaters Anonymous. We were working on our addictions. And I believe that's when our children felt the most abandoned. I mean, this is what they've shared with me, is that that's when they felt the most abandoned. It wasn't during the active disease, because we both did our disease at home, or most of the time, but sometimes it would. But that's when they felt the most abandoned, was in recovery. When we put all of our effort into recovery. And they were young teenagers, and there's some regret in that. I would do things a little different, I think I would. But my whole life was focused around working with alcoholics, and I was getting paid for it. That was a little different than in the past. So one of the things we have to remember about that it's okay to love an alcoholic is just love them with boundaries. Have healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries is learning to say no. No is a complete sentence. No. One of the things that I would do, and I wore myself out doing this, is his mom and dad lived out here at Buffalo Gap, and we lived in Wiley on Buffalo Gap Road, which about 7 or 8 miles north of here, and it wasn't anything. And we, it was back in the days you didn't lock your house at night or anything, but it wouldn't be anything for his mother, which she was a boundary violator, but it wasn't anything for her to bust into our house at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe bringing a pot of soup or something. And, it was my job to hide, I took it on, to hide my husband's alcoholism from his parents. He did not want him to know, and I took it on. Even in Al-Anon, I took on hiding his alcoholism from his parents. And so when he went to the program, they got mad at me because they said I just made up that he was an alcoholic. I just made it up, and that he didn't have a problem. I was the problem. And so, I carried a lot of guilt about his disease. And this is, we're not guilty. The non-alcoholic is not guilty, but I carried a lot of guilt because I couldn't get my mother sober, and then I couldn't get my husband sober, and then I'll be dog, I had a daughter that came along, and I could not get her sober. And finally, through a lot of treatment myself, going to treatment for my own eating disorder, and then going to treatment for codependency. I went to treatment for trauma and codependency for 30 days because I needed to. And I was so ingrained in being a helper of alcoholics. I could not do it in some way. So I learned to set, we need to learn to set boundaries, but set them with love. And I remember the first time that I practiced that is we've been in the oil business for years, and my son went down to San Angelo, a town south of here, 100 miles, and he went to school. But he'd been working for his dad here since he was 13, and he wanted to put in a store down there and go to school, which he did. So he put in a store down there, and they had this big grand opening, invited all the different oil people and all that. And so he wanted me to come, and our older daughter Karen, wanted us to come so we could serve the food and sort of be the hostess. I was healthy enough to say no. I knew what it was going to be. It would be nothing but a drink fest, and I knew they'd all get drunk. And and anyway, I said, no, I can't do that. And I told him why. I said, I'm just not going to put myself through that or ask Karen to go help serve with that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to host, be the hostess of a drinking party. I'm not. So when he came home from that, and it took him 2 days to get back home. And when he got home from that, he left all dressed up and looked so nice. He looked like a business owner, I mean, he cleaned up good, and I helped him pick out his clothes because he was opening a new business, and he left looking so nice. Well, he came back looking like a drunk and a bum. He looked horrible, because he'd been drunk for a couple of days and all. He just looked terrible. And I was on my way out the door, probably to go to work at a treatment center. And this is the first time that I did this. And I went over and I put my arms around him and I said, honey, I love you. I know you're sick with a disease. And I know that you don't know that it's a disease. But I want you to know that I love you, I care about you, and I hope you get some help. And I just hugged him, and I turned around, and I walked out that door. And from that point on, me and the children went on with our lives. And then it wasn't long after that he made his way to Alcoholics Anonymous, and what his first talk was. He said, I don't know what you people did to my wife up here, but I want what she has, because it was an open AA meeting. And I've been going up there for 14, 15 years. He said, I want what she has, which was an ultimate compliment for an alcoholic to make to a non-alcoholic. He said, I want what she has. But he said, she's quit taking care of me. And he said, I was afraid I was going to sit in that chair and die from my drinking, and my family was just going off living their lives. Now that is what success is, because unless the addict, unless the alcoholic, unless the eating disorder person feels the pain of the disease, they're not going to want any help. As long as you're feeling the pain of their disease and you're enabling them to stay sick, they will stay sick and you will get sicker. It is about taking hands off. I surrender. I cannot do this. It is about, loving them enough to set boundaries. Set a boundary with the addict. And then what it does, it puts the problem where the problem belongs. Because if all the enablers, the chief enablers and the minor enablers, anyone, my husband's business, by that time he'd gone into business for himself, and his employees enabled him to death, almost to death. They would cover for him, they would, of course I'm sure they drank right along with him, but until the non-addicts can set a boundary, and say, I love you, I care about you, but I'm not going to go down with you. I'm going on with my life. I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to give you the best letting alone. And you might not say that, that's what you're saying in your head. Give them a good letting alone, and what that means is let them sit in the disease. Because once an addict sits in the disease, and they have to feel every pain of the disease, they might decide they want recovery. I know from my own husband, when I took hands off, it was probably maybe a month, 2 months, when he made his way to AA. That had nothing to do with me. That had everything to do with the God of my understanding getting me out of the way. And I'd quit enabling him for years. It had been years, but it just really took me saying, I love you, I care about you, but I'm not going down with you. I am not. I love you, I care about you. And I did say this, I said, I can stay today. I'm not leaving, but I don't know how long I can stay. And it wasn't a threat, it was a promise. I used to make threats, if you don't stop drinking, I'm going to divorce you. And I knew I'd never divorce him. But I was tired. I was tired, and I'd already rented an apartment across the street from the treatment center, and and I knew. I mean, I wasn't ready to leave then, but I knew I wasn't going to continue to live in the disease of alcoholism. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I'm using myself as an example, and my husband as an example. But I want to tell you. One of the things, if you will back off and let the natural circumstances, in the consequences, letting the addict feel the consequence of their disease, they may want help. Because when they wake up and there's not anyone there to rescue them or to give them money or to bail them out of jail. I bailed him out one time, and I was big pregnant with our third daughter, and I was standing there. We lived in Abilene. He'd run off to Odessa and stayed a few days. Anyway, I won't go into all that. I finally found him, and he was in jail. And I heard him when they were bringing him down the stairs, and he said, "Is my wife down there?" And they said, "Yes." He said, "I'd rather face the judge than my wife." And so that didn't cause him to drink. That's what I did, driving to work every day for a year. So let the consequences be the teachers. Let the consequences. If the addict doesn't face some consequence about their disease, why would they want any help? If they didn't suffer the consequences, if they didn't wake up with throw up all over them, if they didn't miss work, if they didn't, I'd get my husband out of that bed and get his little skinny butt to work. I don't care what, because that was my job. That's what I did. And I'd make him look pretty good in spite of, coming off of the 2 or 3 day drunk. But let the consequences, teach the addict. And unless the non-alcoholic, the non-eating disorder person, or the non-addict of any sort, unless they get some help, we didn't cause it, we didn't cure it, we can't control it, we can contribute to it. And a lot of times, once the addict gets help, that's when the non-addict gets so sick if they don't get help themselves. And they will want the addict to go back to drinking because they've lost their job, they've lost their existence. Who are they if they're not taking care of someone? So this is why it's so essential for not only the spouse of an addict to get help, but the children too. This is such a family disease. It affects everyone across the board. If you have a dog and a cat, it affects them, because the drunk will come in and kick the cat and slap the dog, all of that, and so and I'm talking about alcoholism as it's something evil, and it is. But it's not evil, it is a disease. It is a physical disease, but it has an emotional and mental component to it. And unless the addict treats that mental and emotional side of the disease, they'll just find something else. If they may stop drinking, but they'll find something else to obsess about or to control. So this is why treatment is so essential. Treatment, 12-step programs help, good therapy helps, But when you're picking a therapist, whether you're the family member or you're the addict yourself, check, do an interview. It's your money. Before you go to a therapist, make sure they're trained in the disease of an addiction. Both of my daughters, my oldest daughter has her master's degree, and Kim will have hers in December. And they talk about just how little education they get about addictions in those master degree programs. I mean, hours, a few hours. It's very small amount of education about addictions. So when you're picking a therapist, whether you're the non-alcoholic or the alcoholic, make sure that therapist is grounded in the education that they know. They don't have to be a recovering person, but make sure they understand addiction, or they will take you on roads that is and it's not their fault. They do not know. I had one therapist tell me, and by the way, he weighed about 300 pounds, and the backstory of that, years later, I got to treat his son for drug addiction at the treatment center in town. But anyway, what he told me, he said, well, what you need to do is you need to be nicer to your husband. You need to give him more sex. You need to keep that house cleaner. And I just wanted to slap the man. I said, you have no idea. And I got it then that he was not educated on the disease of alcoholism at all. And then I had this spiritual advisor that was a recovered alcoholic, and she had a sponsor that was sort of well known. I mean, she worked with couples and all. So my friend drug me to her house to talk to me about what I needed to do to take care of my alcoholic husband. And she said, well, first thing you need to do is after he comes off of a drug, then you cook this fabulous meal, and you put out placemats, and you put plates, and you make everything so attractive, and the house beautiful and all, and where he'd rather stay. And this is a recovered alcoholic, and she was telling me that. And I had enough sense now. I said, woman, you have no idea. You ought to come see my house. You ought to see meals. I don't even put ketchup on the table in a bottle. I put it in little bowls. My house, because I grew up, an adult child of an alcoholic, and I didn't know how to set a table, and I learned by watching people, and I thought you set a fine table at every meal. I didn't know, that you could put ketchup on the table in a bottle. And I said, so don't talk to me about how I had enough sense to tell her that, thank you for your information, but we've been down that road before, and that didn't work then, and it won't work now. So anyway, what I'm going to say, it's okay to love an addict, love them, but love yourself more. You have got to learn to love yourself. It is okay to love yourself. And so many people that are family members of alcoholics or addicts, they don't love themselves. They don't. And so through Al-Anon or through, good therapy, good support of some kind, they find out that they're not such a bad person after all, and I know that my friend down at a therapist friend of mine in Florida years later, we had a chance of working with some Russians. They had sent Russians over here, doctors, therapists, nurses, to learn how to treat the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction and eating disorders. And so I went down to Florida, and we got to work with them, these Russians, for 5 days. And they didn't speak much English, and we didn't speak any Russian. But we did all experiential therapy. And at the end, this one woman said, and this is what family members need to do. What this woman said, and they've been all over the United States at treatment centers, and we were the last ones, and we were teaching them about codependency and taking care of themselves. And what she said was, I have taken a liking to myself. And that's what the non-alcoholic must do, is take a liking to themselves. Because there's something about family members and non-alcoholics that don't like themselves. And maybe they came out of alcoholism themselves, but they get their good feelings about themselves from taking care of someone. And I'll tell you, I've helped family members face problems, because when that alcoholic gets sober and gets well, and they start going that way, and having a life, unless the family catches up with them in recovery, that's when the divorce happens. It's not usually during active alcoholism. It is when the alcoholic gets well. If the family doesn't join them, many times that's when the divorce happens. And it's usually the alcoholic filing for divorce. Think about that. Because the family is sick, the non-alcoholic is sick, and there's a certain part, and I know this, and I hate to admit it, but there's a certain part of me, when Ariel first sobered up, there's been times that I want to say, why don't you go drink? Because he was so miserable, and he was such a rager and all. I never said that, but I want to say, here, have a drink, So, love them, but love yourself too. And get help, and there is hope, and there is help for everyone. Everyone can change. And healthy love, I'm going to tell you what healthy love sounds like. It's, I love you, I believe you, or have the ability to recover. I believe you have the ability to recover, and I'll support your recovery, but I will not support the addiction. That's pretty much the words I used with my husband. I love you, I care about you, and I can stay today. I don't know how much longer I can be here. It's not a threat, it's a promise. I am not going to stay in this situation, me and the kids, and watch you kill yourself. But I do want you to know I do love and care about you. And then, pray instead of panic. Prayer helps. I had everybody in the world praying for my husband, and it works. I mean, prayer, instead of panicking, pray. Listen more. Listen. Have a listening for the addict instead of a lecture. They are not going to hear you lecture. Have a listening to them, because there's something that they want to say that they can only say under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that's when you're going to hear, a lot of times, hear the truth out of it. Stop arguing with the addiction. Because when an addict is using, when you're talking to them, you're talking to the addiction. You're not talking to the person. Wait till they're sober. Set boundaries. If you make a threat, follow through. Because, see, the addict doesn't believe really anything that the non-addict says, because most of the family members have threatened for years, if you don't stop drinking, I'm going to do this and such. And you didn't do this and such. You didn't leave. You didn't do this. You did. So they don't believe. They know, oh, well, we'll get past this drunk. She'll be all right, or he'll be all right, And what happens is, start keeping your word, because the addict does not believe a word you say. And family members, we believe every word the addict tells us. And when they tell us, I'm not going to drink anymore, I promise, I'm done, we believe them. Because when we don't know that it's a disease, we don't know that you can't just quit a disease. We think that they can just stop drinking. You don't just stop a disease. There must be help for it. So what you can do then is get yourself professional help. There is people who go to treatment for, and this is the non-alcoholic, go to treatment for codependency. Get in treatment for yourself and see how long you've been a caretaker, Because if you are in a caretaking situation with an addict, if you leave that addict, you'll go find you another one, because that's how you operate. You don't know how to not take care of someone until you get your own help. And, keep hope alive. There is hope in healing. There is hope with healing. And you can heal if the addict never heals. You can find healing. The non-addict can. And so that's what I have. And sometimes the most loving thing that we can do is to step out of a line of fire. Step out of, trying to say something to the addict or take care of her. That's when God can do his work, because unless the addict feels the pain of the disease, they're not going to ever say, God, help me. God, help me. Not my wife help me, not my mother, not my husband. God, help me. And so what we're doing a lot of times is we're trying to play God in people's lives. So there is a God, and it's not any of us. So we need to take hands off of addicts. Don't kill them. It's okay the disease is addiction. It's not anything against anyone. They're not drinking or drugging at anyone or starving themselves or eating and puking over you. They are not. It is a disease. And this is why the whole family needs help. Okay, that's what I have. And what do y'all have today?